when I put out the challenges, obviously one part of that is how do we, as a big country, as a country with a great future, how do we make our decisions based on our interests, on an independence of thought and action? How do we ensure that we do not get pressurized by other countries? And this is a big challenge, because it is a bigger challenge in a globalized world. Because all these linkages with globalization, all of them in one way or the other, people may not say it so directly, they all become forms of pressure. So if you import oil from somewhere, that's a point of pressure. If you import food from somewhere, that is so. If you are getting medicines from somewhere. So how do you actually develop that, both the capacity and equally the mentality to be independent? And we have been through our share of challenges there. We have been, you saw that when it came to buying oil from Russia. You saw that when it came to membership of this group called Quad in the Indo-Pacific, where, again, attempts were made to actually play mind games with us, saying that no, by doing this, somewhere you are compromising your own independence, when in fact we were strengthening it. It could happen, on issues like connectivity, where there may be strategic agendas of connectivity and people push you to do it, saying everybody else is joining, so how can you stay out? So pressures come in different forms. Often pressures come, as I said, through a herd mentality, through a kind of a psychological effort at creating collective thinking. But in all of this, when I talk about big powers, of course, we have a particular challenge from China. That challenge is a very complicated challenge, but in the last 3 years, I think it has been particularly visible in the border areas. And there are clearly responses that are required, and those responses have been undertaken by the government, and a lot of it is to ensure that no attempt is made to unilaterally change the status quo in the border areas, and that we will ensure that peace and tranquility there is the basis of our relationship. That if peace and tranquility is disturbed, it cannot be that the relationship remains unaffected. Now, I have spoken about the big stage, the big powers, but there is the immediate stage. The immediate stage are our neighbors. And I must say here, in the last 9 years, this is one area where Prime Minister Modi personally has brought about a revolution. And it started on his first day as Prime Minister, when he invited the leaders of all our neighboring countries to participate in his Shapath Grahan. And since then, we have been, dealing with the neighborhood in a very different way. Think of it like your own neighborhood where you live. If you are the biggest in your neighborhood, it's in our interest that the other neighbors are share in our prosperity, share in our happiness, are linked to us, that they do not pull necessarily in a different direction. And that will only happen if you take a very generous, a very, I would say, non-reciprocal way of engaging them. And that thinking, which the Prime Minister has personally driven, in the last 8 to 9 years, it has actually completely changed how South Asia is linked to each other. Many of our neighbors, like Bangladesh or Nepal, Bhutan, was always close to us. They are today linked with us through roads, through rail, through waterways. We have electricity grid connections. There are fuel supplies. And what, in many ways, this has done is that they benefit from the scale and the economy of India. That if today India is able to refine fuel and give you the finished product at a lower price, when you are linked to India, that benefit also comes to a neighbor. So the perception today, the linkages and the perception today of India in the neighborhood has changed. And nothing illustrated that more dramatically than what happened to Sri Lanka last year when they went through a very deep economic crisis. And we have actually stepped forward, in a way in which we ourselves have never done before. But what we have done for Sri Lanka is bigger than what the IMF has done for Sri Lanka. So, and if any of you have visited Sri Lanka recently, I think you will note the popular perception that has accrued from this action. Now, when we think of a neighborhood, we largely say, neighborhood is Sri Lanka, Nepal, maybe Pakistan, of course, Myanmar. That's like the limit of what we think. But that wasn't always the case with us. I mean, if you look before 1947, if you had asked my grandfather what he thought of neighborhood, my grandfather would have said Singapore. He would have said Gulf, Aden. I don't know whether he would have gone as far as Egypt. He would have certainly said East Africa. So what we are also trying to do today is actually a bigger India, a more influential India, a more ambitious India. We are trying to expand what should be our neighborhood. So we look at what are, in a way, extended neighborhoods. I mean, these could be the islands in the Indian Ocean, the Gulf. Again, the Gulf has seen a huge change, which, if you look at a relationship like UAE or Saudi Arabia, these relationships have really undergone an enormous transformation in the last decade. Or you go the other direction, Southeast Asia, and I would say even Central Asia. So in each direction, from what was a traditionally much more constricted view of our neighborhood, we have actually undertaken something much more ambitious. And in each case, of course, the region is different, so you have to do each one of those differently. But this has required, in many ways, a lot of effort, clearly by the government collectively, I would say by the country collectively, because a lot of it is driven by business, it is driven by movement of professionals, it is driven by economic benefits, but it is led finally by political thinking. And that political thinking, again, when it comes to the extended neighborhood, has been led by the Prime Minister. Now, when I speak of the neighborhood, I referred earlier to the Quad. I think, again, a big change of our era is what is called the Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific really means that we don't look at the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean as two watertight compartments. It's a bit like, two schools or two centers being merged in a university with the freedom really to operate in both, because that is the reality. In real life, nobody, it's not like a ship says, okay, I'm in Indian Ocean and I don't go across. But for us, when I look at it in terms of our interests, today more than half our trade goes east of India. We have become huge consumers of resources which come out of east of India. So, and strategically, what happens there concerns us very much. At the same time, there are other big changes which are happening, changes which include the rise of China, which include, in a way, how the US has become much more cautious about its own commitments. And all of this has created, of course, a concept called the Indo-Pacific, but it has also created a grouping called the Quad, a Quad which is US, Japan, Australia, and India. We just had a meeting last week in Hiroshima of the Quad. Prime Minister went there. He met his counterparts. And, this is illustrative of the kind of new directions we are moving. Because if you look at the Quad, the Quad is today discussing maritime collaboration. It is looking at infrastructure connectivity. It is looking at 5G. It is looking at vaccines. By the way, it also offers fellowships. So there's a lot out there. I'm sure Nivedita will share some of that with some of you who are interested. But what Quad does is it gives us more space, it gives us new partners, it gives us more comfort. And by the way, we don't call it a quad, we have given it a somewhat musical name called I2U2, but we have a group of countries to the west of India, India, Israel, US and UAE. And here too, there is a group of countries who meet regularly, who discuss projects. And I mention this to you because this is also, in a way, a new way of working. This is actually part of this redesigning that we are talking about. And it's redesigning in the manner in which you work, the creation of platforms, the outcomes which are generated, and the relative weight of the theaters and the fact.